I'll think about something, but first of all, I need to have my lunch, which is already cold, but I do need to have it. And I actually did I did assemble a couple of cool things to react to for today. There is 2 very pog things we can react to today. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to it. Hold on. Let me set everything up. And I think we're just gonna watch both, honestly. But there's 2 things we can do. The first thing is magical hats. Can best of 1 be competitive? I guess very much fitting to Master Duel streams. And the second is, does Moist Critical know Yu-Gi-Oh! Prices by Ruxin? Both of those I expect to be banger videos. So we're just gonna react to both, I think, today. Just because I want to. Let's start with magical hats, because it's a little bit shorter. Actually, yeah.
You've triggered my trap card, the Magical Hats. In this series, myself and 3 of the top Yu-Gi-Oh! Streamers will give their unfiltered, uncensored, and uninformed takes on some of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s most pressing issues. The catch? One of these 4 has a fake take, and it's up to the rest to find the liar. It's time to play Magical Hats.
Easy clap.
And welcome back to another episode of Magical Hats, the show in which the 4 of us, we just try to kill each other. It has been very antagonistic these past few weeks, and I'm sure that this one we will all come to the same normal conclusion. I am joined as ever by Farfa, by Distant Coder, by Nim. How are y'all doing?
I'm doing good, bro. Ready to talk about this very controversial topic.
I'm all right. Thanks for asking, Joseph.
I noticed the...
I don't think it's that controversial of a topic, to be honest. Because the question is, can best of 1 be competitive? The answer is yes. It's very simple. The answer is yes. Best of 1 can be competitive.
The strat pointed out by the comment section, and that whenever Gage is normal, he's the imposter. that seems to be the strat.
I will say, there was a comment 2 weeks ago that said, this series would not work without Gage, and this is going to be put to the test right now. So today we are talking about best of 1. If you're unfamiliar, most competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! In America is played in a best of 3 format. After game 1, both players are allowed to sideboard cards from a list of 15, and then the loser decides if they're going first or second. But in some locations, including many OCG tournaments, and importantly in Master Duel, you only play 1.
I don't think they can. Of course they can. Of course, best of 1 can be competitive. It might be a worse game than a best of 3, but it can still absolutely be competitive, right? I mean, it's like best of 1 is absolutely, it's still competitive. It just has, different skill sets to it as well.
Game. Now this means that there's no sideboarding, no ability to swap out cards, you won't have a deck specifically geared to your opponent's strategy, and you'll never be able to choose if you're going first or second. Today we are asking, is that or can that ever be a competitive format? Kevin, you want to go first?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, best of 1 is... regardless of any other circumstance, I feel like when you are playing a TCG, when you're playing a card game, best of 1 can quite literally never be competitive, due to the simple nature that there's too many, like, Saki one-of cards or auto-win cards like Maxi and stuff like that just make it that if it's a best of 1, you don't even have a chance to sideboard in any cards.
But that doesn't mean it's not competitive. That just means it's not a very good competitive format, in your opinion. Which I guess that's what it's
So
all
in
about.
best of 1, I feel like it's entirely RNG luck-based, regardless of circumstance.
Well, that's the takes that we've come to expect. What do you got, Farfa?
Well, first of all, I think it comes down to what we're defining as competitive. In the context of general ranked grinding, I think in that context, absolutely yes. Master Duel, even in best of 1, is very competitive. The absolute peaks of the game, maybe not. I think something to alleviate that would be like, you know, Conquest mode or whatever the formatting was in like Duel Links. Sticking with the general player base, I think it absolutely can. And there is and will be a lot of variance. I understand that, of course, because it's best of 1. But fundamentally, competitive in the context for the average player, yes, people who get Diamond 1 do so consistently because they're good. Is Yugioh competitive in a best of one setting? I think, yeah, in the context for the most numerous amount of Yu-Gi-Oh players, the average player, yes, I think Master Duo can be competitive.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. Coder and I have butted heads on this a little bit on stream, so this is a little cheating. But as you all know, my position on this is, yeah, I think that best of one is a viable competitive format. It tests a significant amount of skills that are not tested in best of three. Building your deck as you would in best of three is going to make a best of one game seem sacky, uninteractive, and unfun, but there are ways to build around it and play differently that will reap unbelievable rewards. The fact that there's an
I think MBT is the imposter, because I agree.
Entire, portion of the game in the OCG where a significant amount of tournaments are held in best of one and are considered competitive, I think goes to show that the format has the capacity to be a lot deeper than just die roll turbo. I think that a lot of the things that Kevin said that sideboarding fixes isn't even necessarily true. Like if you think back to like the NAWCQ format from this year, sideboarding wasn't necessarily a good thing. Frequently you'd play an interesting game one, and then in game two you could board into like dimensional barrier if you were going first, and like super polymerization if you were going second, and then just play two non-games after the singleton pre-boarded skill-based one.
I actually really
That's a good take. It's a very good take. Now, best of three has some advantages over best of one in terms of a competitive format, but I think the side deck is not the main catch for that. The side deck is okay. It has a lot of advantages to have a side deck, but it also has disadvantages, and that's like the fact that when you go first, you can play a bunch of floodgates. You can side whatever. When you go second, you can side a bunch of like really powerful board breakers. And that's not always a good thing, right? Like, I mean, being anti-spelled into oblivion in certain formats every time when you go second in siding is not a great thing as well. And like the main thing that best of three offers is just more games in general means more skill testing. A lower chance of one game deciding the outcome of the entire match. The better player will maybe not win a single game, but they are more likely to win 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7. This is why best of 3 is a more consistent format than best of 1. Best of 5 is a more consistent format than best of 3. Best of 7 is a more consistent format than best of 5, and so on and so forth. Like that is always true. It's always true that the more games you play, the more often the better player wins. But that is always true, right? The question is best of one still a good format? And I think the answer can still be yes. Best of one just has different sort of skill sets where deck building changes in best of one, some stuff changes, and yes, the variance is higher. The variance is higher, but that doesn't mean it's not competitive or completely like terrible. But sideboarding in itself does not strictly make the game better.
have the same idea as like both Farfa and you, Joseph. I think Farfa put it best actually. He ended up saying like,
I'm scared.
said,
Gage agrees with me. I'm scared.
No, genuinely, like you had a really good idea. I think we have to look at Master Duel, and Master Duel, it really is Yu-Gi-Oh down to its core, but it's also Yu-Gi-Oh in a different sense, and that
Zane, thank you for the 8. Appreciate you.
is the best of one. And I think there's a lot of different applications that you can't like apply from a best of 3 format to a best of 1. For example, like traditional deck building standards. You might build your deck more aligned to go first because that's what the strategy is meant to do, and then have cards to combat second going into the side deck and stuff like that. But when you're doing a best of 1, you can't really take that in consideration. I do think that there's a lot of competitive skills to put towards a best of 1 that you maybe have to look at the game differently. But at the end of the day, I do have to say, when we're figuring out who's the best, we're always defaulting to a best of 3. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Like even for Master Duel tournaments, the very first Master tournament that Swag Kage held, you do best of 1 all throughout the ladder, and then you hit all the way into the top cut, and everyone's switching to best of 3. However, at the end of the day, I do think both formats are competitive. It's just which way you do choose to look at it. How do we describe competitive?
The thing is that I feel like we're getting mixed up here as well, is that best of 3 does not necessarily mean side deck. Because the Pokemon TCG plays best of 3. but they don't have a side deck. They just play 3 games with the same decks. That way, you just eliminate some variance in like who gets to go first and who gets lucky in one game. It doesn't necessarily have to do with a side deck. I feel like this is a discussion that needs to be split in 2 things, right? Is the side deck a good thing in a best of 3 setting? And then like, is best of 1 or best of 3 better, right? And like, I don't think that the side deck is a strict positive, right? But I've played many card games over the past years where you have best of 3s or other sort of formats like Conquest or whatever, but you don't have a side deck. Like Hearthstone used to do that. Legends of Runeterra used to do that. Like I said, Pokemon has always been like that. So I think the side deck is a different question than best of 1 or best of 3, right? And like, I think it's a strong argument against side decking, looking at modern Yu-Gi-Oh side decks, where like in the majority of the matchups you will put in cards that just auto win the matchup, right? You look at cards like D-Barrier, Feather Duster, Evenly Matched, Anti-Spell Fragrance. You have such a the amount of toxic cards that people are siding, that it's so much higher. It's so much higher than what people are putting into their main decks. Because they're like, hey, I can auto win with Evenly Matched, but at least in the main deck, it has the drawback of like, if I go first, it's a dead card. I can like win every time I go first with Anti-Spell, but I'm not maining it because if I go second, it's a dead card. And side decking completely removes these drawbacks from these completely unreasonable cards. And that's why you see them in the side deck almost every time and not in the main deck. And so I think side decking can also create a lot of imbalancing in a card game, because knowing who gets to go first and adjusting your deck accordingly, I don't think that's what the side deck was originally supposed to do. I'm having a great day, Hambina. Thank you for the 4 months. You just made it a little bit better. Thank you so much for that. I think you could argue that the side deck was not meant for that. Like I like side decking when it's like, okay, I have a couple of cards that are not very good in this matchup, and I side them out for like slightly better cards, right? The idea of like, hey, I need like this or that slightly better card. Like when you're siding out, I don't know, you're playing against, for example, you're siding out Nibiru against a deck that doesn't really summon 5 times, and you add a Cosmic Cyclone instead. That's like good side deck design wise. That's like great side deck, great use of the side deck from a design perspective. But when everyone is just like basically side decking more for going first and second rather than what deck they're playing against, that makes it kind of like bad in my opinion. Even being able to like, hey, I can side deck these cards like the Zombie World against Flunder, the Feather Duster and Evenly against Labyrinth, the Ash and Dimensional Barrier and Anti-Spell against Branded, and then I'm also putting like, I don't know, the whatever. It's like it's really annoying in my opinion having to deal with that sort of stuff. So the side deck has a lot of downsides and that does not have anything to do with best of 1 or best of 3. Best of 1, best of 3, very simple. Best of 3 is a better competitive format than best of 1, leaving all the side deck discussion to the side. Literally. Best of 1 is a worse competitive format because simply you play less games. So you have more variance. Like a sick hand or a lucky draw can decide one game. It's less likely to decide a best of 3. So the more games you play, the better it is. But that doesn't mean that best of 1 is completely terrible. Best of 1 is still an okay competitive format. It's worse than best of 3, but at the end of the day, it's still Yu-Gi-Oh! And not every Yu-Gi-Oh! Game is decided by luck. Like, if best of 1 was such a bad format, like every single game was decided by luck, then it doesn't even matter if you're playing best of 1 or best of 3 or best of 5. Like, if the basic game is so bad, if each individual game is so bad, then who cares if it's best of 3? If every single game is decided by luck, then it shouldn't matter. So, like, by simply stating the fact that, like, you know, the game is in its core, the game is skillful, right? Only some games are decided by luck or variance. Then the best of 1 is still a fine format. It's worse than best of 3, but it's still okay.
I do think having a ladder, a good sense of the ladder and playing and to grind up to diamond is very different than taking your decks into a tournament setting and sitting down at a best of 3 where a side deck is involved. That might take a little more consideration into the decks that you'll be seeing on a tournament standard. Is anybody actually completely outlandish though? I don't think anybody had a wild take.
Well,
No,
Kevin's always
I
on
mean,
the 0-100 thing, right? Like
I think, by the way, after hearing all 4 talk for the first time, I think it's Farfa. Because once again, and I'm saying it right now, I don't even need to watch the last 7.5 minutes. I think Farfa's take is far too middle of the road for it to be a Farfa take.
always
On
hate
the
something or
context
love
of
something.
the people here.
I feel like I should clarify what I mean by this. To me, a format that is competitive is a format that rewards skill over anything else. Like, you look at competitive football, like the best teams with the most skillful players, for the most part, will take a W. The majority of those games aren't determined by some luck factor or something like that. Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh, I feel like, well, in a best of one scenario, I feel like that luck factor heavily outclasses the skill factor that you'll be seeing, as opposed to in a best of 3, which, as Gage specified, best of 3 is usually what we default to see.
That sounds like it's his actual opinion. That sounds like an opinion that someone who just doesn't like best of 1 has.
Who is the more skillful of 2 players, because in a best of 3, skill outweighs the luck.
I think all of us agree that best of 3 is going to be more skillful, right? But the question is is best of 1 still competitive in and of itself in isolation?
I would push back on that a little bit. I think that the difference between a best of 1 and a best of 3 is that there is less variance in a best of 3, right? Like, it's unlikely your opponent's going to draw this big unanswerable card like Maxi 2 games out of 3. But I don't necessarily think that it's more skillful. If you include a sideboard system in a best of 3, maybe game 1 is determined by Maxi, but game 2 being determined by Dimension Barrier and game 3 being determined by the other Dimension Barrier isn't necessarily skillful. You know, you are able to find, with more consistency, more targeted outs to your opponent's game plan. There's less variance, but it doesn't necessarily make games with more back and forth or games in which the more skilled player is rewarded. Just look at how...
Okay, now we're mixing up best of 3 with side decking again. Kind of hurting the discussion a little bit, I think.
Frequently people board into floodgates in games 2 and 3 in the TCG.
You know, I've never thought of the game like that, Joseph, but that's honestly surprisingly true, and I've never thought of it
Well,
like that.
yeah, that's true, but I think most people look at it as a way deck building is an important aspect of the game, and that's not what Joseph is saying there. He's saying those are cards that you can just throw in and then you auto win games, which is true. But don't you think there's a level of a reward to okay, I figured out all the decks that I should be able to see on my competitive grind. Maybe slotting in these correct cards, maybe that's a level up from somebody else. You know what I'm saying? There's some side deck cards even last weekend, bro, that people were saying, somebody told me about Magic Deflector against Kashtira, and I wouldn't have thought of that right away. And I thought about it, and it beats everything. So he had that crazy cool meta call, and I think somebody that shows up to a tournament with that idea should be rewarded on some level. You know what I'm saying?
Didn't play 2016 Monarchs, Gage.
You know, look at all these tournaments that people are playing that are just best of 1, like on Master Duel and stuff like that. You do not see the same names consistently topping every event, because there's too much, like you say, variance.
Kevin, that's just not true, right? Because best of 1 format, first of all, is probably dictated mostly by, I suppose, technically my Challenger Cup, right? And I see the similar names in Top Cut very regularly throughout these Challenger Cups.
We've only had, 3 weeks of the MCS, and, the attendance to that is not always the same people, because they have to have huge APM to sign up. But even then, accounting for the bubble, you can expect a group of the same 30 or 40 people to be the people in contention every week.
You can't account for the bubble, and I think there's been one repeat topper in the 3 tournaments you've run.
There was one repeat topper from week 1 to 2. I haven't looked at week 3.
There's numerous repeat toppers in the Challenger Cup.
He's really harping on this one thing that there's already actual proof against it. So why are you defending it so hard?
With regards to the same people topping the YCSs, that's also a very modern thing. It was true post-Pote, but there were tons of formats pre-Pote where you would see 8 or 9 people you don't recognize in a top 16.
I mean,
I mean, you always have some people you don't recognize, but it's just where are we going?
It waxes and
I
wanes
feel like,
based
I
on
feel
the
like
format.
that's just not true. You go back to 2014, the same players were topping all the time. 2016, the same players were topping all the time.
2014 was
Ashton for gaming, think of it a 5.
an exceptionally skilled format. 26, like there have been formats that are skilled and allow for skill expression to rise to the top, and there have been formats where randos can sneak in a top 16.
Has there been a format like that in Master Duel in the past entire year that this game's been out?
Well, Farf is hosting a series of tournaments in which the same people are topping, right?
I don't know.
I don't think that's true, to be honest. I don't think that the Master Duel Challenger Cups were like the best argument here in terms of showing like, oh, the same people top over and over and over again, because they were, I don't think they were really. I feel like the people that have been topping MCS's not MCS's Challenger Cups consistently were just the people that were willing to play Runic Sprite. I feel like everyone else who was trying to play like fun decks had to like gamba on it. At least that's how I felt.
I straight up just don't agree.
Who do you think is the imposter, Gage?
Oh, that's a tough one, bro.
Who's-
Because I really
who's lying?
don't know. I think it would. I kind of get a hint, even like you, Farfa. I'm gonna be honest, like you.
I am 100% on the Farf.
I
kinda
also think
like,
that it's Farfa.
Why?
Yeah, I
told
feel
you,
like
like, 5
you've had
minutes
some
ago.
very strong opinions about Master Duel in particular when the game has come out, and I think one of the ones that you've just constantly like harped on is the fact that it's a best of one. I think everybody's had that problem, like it's a best of
Yeah.
one, and I don't. Well, that's not one that I've particularly heard you let up about. So it feels weird for you to like do a 180 at this point.
Yeah, I also felt that when he started talking.
Well, okay,
about,
that might be true, but to defend Farfa just a little bit, he is a Konami employee hosting a best of one tournament. He has to say.
Okay, I have a guess.
Yeah, me too.
God, this is a
I'm
tough
still,
one.
I'm still thinking. Jesus Christ.
All right,
It's
everyone ready?
Farfa.
Yeah.
Yep.
3, 2, 1.
I put MBT. Who is it? Who is it?
It was me.
Ah! Really?
Oh my god.
How could it possibly have been you? That's your real take.
It is actually not. I will clarify. I am against best of one currently with the way things are in Master Duel. Do I think best of one is a viable competitive format? Yes, it is, under the like circumstances where the ban list is unbelievably aggressive. Like, I genuinely think that if we have a best of one format where the ban list feels tailored towards best of one, then yes, it is absolutely a competitively viable format. I think that in its current position on Master Duel anyway, like with Maxi and stuff like that, I think it's absolutely not. So currently,
I think it can be like they were talking above each other's head for like the half this episode, because they were talking about, can best of one be competitive, which is like, of course it can be, but they were like talking about like the wrong things, like, oh, side decking, like that's not the point. Like, you can play a best of 3 without a side deck. It's just like, of course best of one can be competitive in Yu-Gi-Oh if the format is good, right? If the format is good, then everything can be competitive, right? Because a good format by definition makes for good games, and it doesn't matter if it's game 1, 2, or 3. It's probably going to be a good game in a good format. And so basically, Coder's take is like, currently is not a good format for best of one because the ban list doesn't reflect it, which I can get behind. I can get behind the current Master Duel ban list not really reflecting the fact that it's best of one, because there's a couple of cards that just decide games a lot more than others. You know, I'm looking at Max C, I'm looking at Called by the Grave, I'm looking at certain floodgates, I'm looking at certain types of decks that just make incredibly strong boards. And like, that stuff is already a problem when you play 3 games. But when you play a best of one, it's really annoying to have like games where from the get-go you look at opening hands and there's like no shot you can win. And yeah, that's like that's a thing in Master Duel right now for sure.
I don't agree with best of one, but I think there is a world where we get to a point where it can be competitively viable.
I will say it was very refreshing to hear this take that you had, which really kind of opened, because I've sort of, for many years now, it's sort of been like a very eureka moment where you think of best of 3 as like the peak of skill because it alleviates a lot of variance. But because of targeted floodgates, sometimes game 2 and 3 is actually way less skillful than game 1.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about it that way.
It's format to format, but
it is format dependent. It is format dependent, but this is true. Like, side decking can sometimes not be a good thing, but it also doesn't always mean, like, best of 3 does not necessarily mean side decks. Like, you could have Master Duel best of 3 tournaments without side decking, you know? It's just like, we are playing best of 3s plus side deck. And there's other games that don't have it, and that's also fine for them.
yeah, I think the D-barrier format at Nats was one that was, I mean, very specifically like that.
Yeah.
I even think, like, looking now, Joseph really did bring that, like, knock that out of the park. That was a good argument. Like, even with thrust and pulling, like, dimensional barrier out the deck, but, like, I feel like that's something, like, it makes it even more consistent now that you're gonna see those targeted floodgates.
Thanks, Konami.
I do think that side decking, the idea behind side decking is great, of course. I think the idea of, like, being able to take out some weaker cards in the matchup for some better cards in the matchup is great. It's a great dynamic because it rewards good deck building. It's like, of course, like a main deck is already hard to build, and then rewarding, like, you're having a side deck that you also need to build correctly is good, right? It's like you have more deck building to be done, and I think that's a good thing. I think the problem is that there's a lot of cards. I mean, once again, we're just like repeating myself each time, but like there's a lot of cards that should not be in the game in general.
Love thrust.
Move one frame forward.
You had to end it on that,
You
didn't
are.
you?
You
Yeah,
are
let's
free.
thrust it up, boyos.
Oh
All
my
right.
God.
Let's go.
All right, that was interesting though. I like that. See, always kind of sleepy suggestion. Where is it? Where is it? You can even do best of 1 with open deck lists and siding pre-game 1. That? I mean, that make it even worse though right now. Right now, that I feel like that would make it even worse. Unless you side before the dice roll. Right? If you can, like, add in hand traps against, you know, some... Nah, I guess... If you don't know who goes first, then I wouldn't hate it. That's the point. Yeah, if you so, like, and by that, do you mean only side before game 1 and then never side after? Like between games 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, do we just not side anymore? Do we have to set on a deck on a list before game 1? Because I think I would like that more, or best of 1, right? Oh, best of 1. Best of 1. And we side before the game. That'd be better for Master Duel, honestly. I think that would be okay. I think I'd be happy with that. Because then you can, like, if your opponent's playing a heavy combo deck, you can play a hand trap deck, but you still can't just put, like, anti-spell in your deck because you don't know whether you're gonna go first or second. You can't really put D-barrier in your deck because you don't know whether you're gonna go first or second. Interesting.